I mean, the Nazis were brilliant marketers. They even hijacked faith itself, promising a so-called positive Christianity.
Imagine if the power of Jesus Christ and the Christians who have faith in him was used to uphold the principle that ultimate loyalty belongs to God and not to a political leader who demands absolute power. Unfortunately, Christianity as a religion is not immune to failure, as our humanity makes us all less than perfect by design. Hubris and bigotry become attractive when we look to anyone but God and Jesus when times are hard. Any one of us can be led astray in our faith and our politics. We fail to truly honor God and be Christ-like during the mass persecutions of the Spanish Inquisition and World War I. We initially failed and then ultimately banded together to overcome the longer persecution that was World War II. It takes a truly faithful Christian to counter and help redeem a Christian who has been blinded and manipulated by circumstance. But there is strength in numbers. Can we band together again and rise to the occasion this time before divisions go too far? Pay attention to the signs and don't be silent. Don't be led astray, but take Christ-like action. Begin by understanding your history so that you are not doomed to repeat it.
How on earth did a nation that was so overwhelmingly Christian become the architect of the Holocaust? It's a tough question. Today, we're going to dig into the really troubling history of the German church under the Third Reich. So let's kick things off with a statement that, seems to put the whole issue to bed. But as you're about to see, it actually blows the entire conversation wide open. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a hugely influential Jewish leader, he made a really powerful case for this. He said, look, the Holocaust was not a Christian event. He argued it was a deeply neo-pagan movement, something that rejected Christian values, not something that grew out of them. But that very clear-cut view, well, that's where the real debate gets started.
Because when you start digging into the sources, you find a much more tangled and uncomfortable reality. They suggest that even if Nazism was anti-Christian at its core, there's just no way it could have risen to power without wrapping itself in the language, the symbols, and the culture of Christian Germany.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in 1933. And it's so important to get this. This wasn't some secular country being taken over by a fringe group. No, Nazi Germany grew right out of the soil of a profoundly Christian nation. You've got a population of around 60 million people. And the key thing here is that religion wasn't just a private, personal thing. It was woven into the very fabric of being German, of national identity. That Christian context, it changes everything.
And just look at this chart. The sheer scale is staggering. Protestants and Catholics made up pretty much the entire country. And then you see the Jewish community, the very people who would be targeted with such unimaginable hatred, they were less than 1%, a tiny, tiny minority in this vast sea of Christians. So for a lot of German Christians, Nazism didn't show up looking like this big, scary monster. It actually looked like salvation. It promised to bring back order, to be a shield against godless communism, and to restore German pride. I mean, the Nazis were brilliant marketers. They even hijacked faith itself, promising a so-called positive Christianity, which was basically a version of the faith with all the Jewish parts stripped out and replaced with German nationalism.
But, and this is a huge but, the church did not speak with one voice. Not even close. As the Nazis grabbed more and more power, this fierce battle for the very soul of German Christianity just erupted from within.
Inside the Protestant church, you basically had two warring factions. On one side, you had the so-called German Christians, and they were all in, trying to create this Nazified faith. But on the other side, you had the confessing church, and they bravely stood up and declared, no, our ultimate not to some earthly Führer. Now, the Catholic Church, they took a totally different path. At first, they actually forbade Catholics from joining the Nazi Party. But then the Vatican made a deal with Hitler's regime. It was called the Concordat. And in exchange for protecting Catholic schools and institutions, the Vatican agreed to dissolve the main Catholic political party, which had been a major voice of opposition to the Nazis.
And just tragically, caught right in the middle of all this, were thousands of Jewish people who believed in Jesus. The state saw them as Jews, and shamefully, their own churches rejected them. They were expelled, And ultimately, they shared the exact same horrific fate as other Jews in the concentration camps.
So this all leads to the hardest question of all. Why? Why was there so much complicity? Why wasn't there more resistance? And the sources tell us the answer isn't really in the 1930s. It's in the centuries of history that had already poisoned the well.
This timeline is, well, it's chilling. It shows that Nazi ideology didn't just pop up out of thin air. It built on these much older, darker ideas. Things like the purity of blood concept from the Spanish Inquisition, and maybe most shocking of all, the violent, anti-Semitic writings of Martin Luther himself, the father of the Protestant Reformation. Nazi propagandists actually weaponized Luther's words. It was so blatant that one of them tried to use it as his defense at the Nuremberg war crimes trials.
And that really leaves us with a final and pretty unsettling question. If history shows that good people, sincere people, can have their deepest values warped by propaganda and fear, well, the question isn't just about them, it's about us. How do we learn to recognize when our own priorities, our own deeply held beliefs, are being subtly distorted?